I've worked this farm for 10 years now, and every single morning still begins the same way, though I'll never call it routine. Not in a place like this. Not when the land remembers things better left forgotten. My name's Rick, and I live out here, miles from town, where the mist rolls in thick across the pastures before the sun decides it wants to rise, where the silence doesn't sound like silence at all, but like a held breath that never ends. I tell people I just fix fences, tend cattle, haul feed, sign papers, the kind of steady work a man can count on. But that's not the truth of it. Not really. Because this farm isn't normal. This land was never meant to be farmed, not after what happened here, long before my time. Folks say a pest house stood right where the hay barn leans now, back when sickness burned through the county like dry brush fire. They buried bodies by the dozens, then by the hundreds, until they stopped bothering with names, until they stopped digging graves one by one and just carved long pits into the ground, tossing the dead in like they were clearing out rotten crops. They thought the dirt would keep the sickness down, keep it quiet, but the dirt never forgets. When the owners bought the land cheap and slapped up barns and silos, they paved over everything thick as a coffin lid, convinced that history couldn't crawl back through concrete. But I've seen enough to know better. The accidents here don't read like accidents. A man doesn't get pulled clean into a grain auger without a trace of jammed machinery. A calf doesn't wander into a sealed silo without someone or something opening the door for it. And cameras don't freeze on empty frames unless something doesn't want to be seen. That's why we have rules, written in grease pencil on a cracked board nailed inside the tack room. Rules every worker learns quick or doesn't last long enough to need them. Rule 1. If you see the lantern along the fence line, you greet him, say "Evening, Tom," and keep moving. Rule 2. Never leave the red feed bin in the loft empty. If you take, you give, something that matters. And rule 3, when the sun goes down, stay out of row 32. Don't linger near the red scarecrow, and if a straw tag marked 32 ever turns up in your pocket, burn it before it burns you. I've lived by those rules. That's why I'm still here. But the truth is, the rules didn't come out of nowhere. They were written in sweat and fear, passed down from men whose hands shook as they carved them. You don't get rules like these unless something demanded them first. I tell myself I'm steady, that I can manage the strange if I just keep my head down. But sometimes when I hear the dogs whining at shadows that aren't there, or when I find something small and wrong tucked into the hay, like a child's ribbon tied around a clump of straw, or a coin so old its edges are gone smooth, I think about the men who worked here before me, the ones who didn't make it, and I wonder how long the land plans to let me last. You'd think after 10 years it would get easier, that the fear would dull. But fear out here is like rust. It spreads quiet and patient, eating through even the thickest steel until one day it snaps what you thought was unbreakable. Sometimes I sit on the porch after a shift, boots still muddy, staring across the corn rows, and I swear I see the red scarecrow shift its head just enough to listen, just enough to remind me it knows I'm watching. Sometimes, if I stay out late enough, I'll catch the glow of a lantern moving slow and steady along the north fence line, a light that doesn't belong to any of the living, and my mouth will mutter the words before my brain can catch up. "Evening, Tom." Because I know what happens if you forget. And every so often, when I climb into the loft to fetch feed, the red bin will be sitting there with its latch hanging open. And inside I'll find something I never put there, something that doesn't belong to any man still breathing. And I'll have to leave a piece of myself behind to balance the trade. I don't know how much longer I've got before this farm takes more than I can give. But I know one thing. The rules are the only reason I'm still standing, and breaking them is the quickest way to end up part of the land's memory. Another story whispered over coffee in the break room. Another name no one says out loud, but everyone remembers when the wind moves through the corn. People in town say the farm is just land, just dirt and sweat and old fence posts leaning under the weight of seasons. But they don't hear what I hear when the rain sets in. don't see what I see after storms roll through and the ground coughs up little reminders of what was buried here, long before tractors ever cut furrows into it. Bits of pottery slick with mud, a brass button green with age, once even the curve of a tooth the size of a child's thumbnail, pale as chalk and twice as brittle. The foreman tells us not to think too hard about those things, says a farm this old is bound to be layered with history, but his eyes slide off mine whenever I ask why the old survey maps in the courthouse show a blank rectangle right over where the hay barn now sits. A rectangle with no orchard, no pasture, no outbuildings. Just empty space, as if the cartographer knew better than to draw what was really there. I've come to learn that the land itself doesn't forget. It rearranges. And when it rearranges enough, it lets you know through accidents that don't read like accidents. The first time I saw it plain was with the boy named Curtis, fresh out of high school, cocky the way you are when the world hasn't gotten its claws into you yet. We were loading grain into the auger, the kind of machine you respect the way you respect a rattlesnake. Give it space, watch your hands, keep your mind on what you're doing. Curtis laughed at the posted warnings, said he'd been working with tools his whole life. One second he was leaning too close, the next he was gone. Not pulled, not shredded, just gone. Like the machine had opened its throat and swallowed him whole without much of a belt squeal. We tore the thing apart piece by piece, nothing jammed, no trace of him but a glove left limp in the dirt. The sheriff wrote it up as misadventure, but we knew better. Because that same night, the dogs lay on the porch whining at shadows that stretched the wrong way. And the red scarecrow in row 32 faced east instead of west, like it had turned to watch us dig. You learn to keep your questions to yourself around here, because questions make the land notice you, and being noticed is worse than being ignored. Still, even when I keep my head down, I can't unsee what I've seen. Cameras in the barn freezing on a single frame of empty hay, calves bawling as if something brushed past them in the dark, the heavy thud of pavement sagging by the north fence as if a coffin lid gave way beneath it. My buddies at the pub think I'm a man who counts sacks and drinks cheap beer and plays pool badly, and I let them believe that, because telling the truth would only earn me laughter, and laughter in the face of this place is the quickest way to earn yourself a straw tag stamped 32. I know because I almost got one once. Woke up with a slip of yellowed straw tied neat in twine tucked in my shirt pocket.
After a long day that bled into night, and I had no memory of how it got there. I burned it before the sun rose, but the smell wasn't of straw. It was of old flesh and train smoke, and I swear I heard an engine starting somewhere deep beneath the soil. Sometimes, late at night, I walk the outer fence just to test myself, just to prove I'm still the kind of man who can face down what lurks here. And every time I do, I see Tom's lantern bobbing steady along the ditch. My throat speaks the words before I can think. Evening, Tom. Because my mouth knows what my mind refuses to gamble with. The land takes its debts in silence, and silence is more dangerous than any scream. The longer I stay here, the more I feel the rules aren't superstition, but etiquette. Manners you keep with something older than yourself. A tenant you share the land with who doesn't forgive rudeness. That's why I follow them even when no one's watching. That's why I nail them to my memory like scripture. Greet the man with the lantern, feed the red bin with something that costs me, never walk row 32 after sundown. Because the farm isn't waiting to kill me outright. It's waiting for me to forget. And forgetting, out here, is the same thing as consent. Tom's the reason Rule 1 exists, and even after a decade I still feel the chill of that name run down my back whenever the lantern glow cuts through the mist along the fence line. Folks who only hear the story at the bar think it's just an old farmhand's ghost, a folk tale passed down to spook green kids into paying attention. But I know better because I've seen him more than once, and every time my mouth speaks before my mind can catch up. Evening, Tom. And that small courtesy is the only reason I'm still here telling you this instead of lying under a slab of dirt without a name. The ledger that once held his last name bled into blue fog after a roof leak, so now he's just Tom, a man who lived careful, worked careful, the type who checked the same gate twice and carried a lantern like it was an extra limb. He came here after leaving the rails, looking for steadier work, and the last anyone saw of him alive was that lantern bobbing slow along the ditch. The dog returned alone, the lantern's glass was found cracked in the mud, and his body turned up by the fence with the uniform soaked, but the head gone. Not mangled, not torn, just gone as if something had claimed it clean. Coyotes, the sheriff said, though every man who worked here spat in the dirt when he heard that, because coyotes don't cut neat, and they don't vanish a skull like it's been pocketed. The county closed the farm for a month under the pretense of resurfacing the loading ramp, but when the gates opened again, Tom came with them. The first night I saw him, I was young, still new, still thinking the rules were the kind of jokes old-timers played on rookies. I was walking the line with a flashlight whose batteries drained faster than they should have, and when I felt the air tighten around my throat, like a collar cinched too high, I looked up, and there he was. Tall, shoulders bent from years of work, lantern swaying slow, no face where the head should have been. My knees wanted to give, my lungs froze, but my mouth remembered what the foreman drilled into me and whispered it. "Evening, Tom." He paused, lantern light flickering across the posts, and then he walked on, steady as if he'd just been checking for breaks like he always had. That was when I understood Rule 1 wasn't a suggestion, it was survival. I've heard what happens to men who forget. A summer hire named Darren, cocky and loud, laughed off the warning, said he'd never waste his breath greeting shadows. He lasted 3 nights. On the 4th, he saw the glow in the distance, turned his back, didn't speak, didn't nod. We found him sitting by the stock pond at dawn, uniform neat, hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for church to start. Only thing missing was his head. The search went on all day, but it wasn't until one of the old hands opened Darren's locker looking for gloves that they found it, jammed between boots and a folded jacket, eyes wide like they'd just realized too late what had happened. After that, nobody joked about Rule 1. Even the new hires who sneer on their first day find their voices softening to a whisper when that lantern glow cuts the dark. I think Tom doesn't know he's dead, not fully. He walks the line, searches the ground, scans the posts, as if he still believes he's earning his pay. That's why we greet him, because as long as he thinks he's still one of us, he won't turn on us. If he ever realizes otherwise, I don't want to be around to see what he becomes. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder what he's looking for. His head, maybe. Or something the land promised to return. Whatever it is, he hasn't found it yet, and until he does, we keep to courtesy. We don't laugh, we don't test it, and we sure as hell don't fall silent when the light comes. You see, fear teaches a man habits, and out here, habit is all that keeps you breathing. Row 32 is the reason I don't wander the corn after sundown. Not unless I've lost my damn mind, and even then I'd probably hug the fence and pray I didn't hear the hum that comes from deep inside those stalks once the sun dips behind the silo. The maps don't show a row 32, the planting charts don't list it, the foreman swears the numbering ends at 31, but every man who's worked this farm long enough knows exactly where it is. The row you don't step into, the row that runs a little darker, the row with the red scarecrow standing dead center like it owns the place. It wasn't always red, they tell me. Years back, it was just another scarecrow patched together from feed bags and straw, its grin painted wide to amuse the kids who came during fall festivals. But one season, somebody dyed the fabric a bright, cheerful red, maybe to make it stand out for tourists, maybe because the old canvas was too stained to pass for anything else. Whatever the reason, the dye didn't just stain the cloth. It sank into the soil, into the stories, into the way people look at that corner of the farm. In the daytime, it looks silly, almost harmless, arms outstretched, face turned to the sun, but at night the whole field changes. The dogs won't go near it, not even with a leash dragging them forward. The corn hushes when you cross too close, like breath held tight, and the scarecrow's painted grin seems to loosen at the seams. Not broken, not torn, but just wrong. Like it's learning to move. I used to think I imagined it until the night I caught the thing cocking its head a notch to the left, as if it had just heard my footsteps. The others warned me, if you ever hear children's laughter near the scarecrow, don't look down, don't look around, just get back on the path and keep walking. I didn't believe them until it happened. Late one July evening, the sky still orange but the shadows already long, I was checking irrigation when a giggle floated up right beside me, low, quick, playful. My gut froze because I was alone in that field, every row empty but mine. I stared at my boots and
Some faded end, and when I finally looked up, the scarecrow was leaning, straw ribs pressing against the seams as though something inside had shifted. We patch it every spring, and every spring we find things sewn into its hem that don't belong. Ribbons, gum wrappers, once a baby sock no family on the farm ever claimed. Livestock vanished some years, first barn cats and chickens, then calves, and no matter how wide we search, no tracks lead away. The old hands keep a jar in the shop filled with what we've cut out of the scarecrow when it's restuffed. Bones the size of lamb ribs, bits of twisted wire bent into shapes that fit a child's wrist, a coin blackened with something thicker than rust. The foreman shrugs, calls it vandalism, but I've seen how he won't meet our eyes when he says it. The jar stays capped, tucked on the highest shelf, because we don't know what else to do with it. Sometimes kids visiting the farm stop dead in their tracks, grip their parents' hands and refuse to go near the red scarecrow, their little bodies shaking like they've seen something no one else can. Other kids are worse. They wave at it like they're greeting an old friend. Quiet, intimate, personal. Not the kind of wave you give a statue. Those are the ones that scare me most, because every few years, a child goes missing here. And though there are never posters, never announcements, never news stories, we know. We always know. The security footage shows them standing near the scarecrow one moment, gone the next, without walking away, without being taken, just gone. Afterward, the scarecrow looks different. Stitches pulled tighter, seams stretched as if something inside has shifted. The paint around the mouth dull and stiff like something dried there overnight. Maintenance comes through, freshens the paint, sews the seams, and by the weekend, the scarecrow is smiling again. But we remember, and we keep the rule alive. After sundown, don't step into row 32. Don't linger by the red scarecrow. And if a straw tag marked 32 ever shows up in your pocket, burn it fast and don't look back. Because row 32 isn't just a row of corn. It's a door. And a scarecrow is the thing that stands there, grinning, waiting, always hungry for whoever's foolish enough to forget the rules. If row 32 keeps me out of the corn after sundown, then the red feed bin in the loft keeps me honest. And I've come to fear that box more than anything else on this farm. Because it isn't loud, it isn't obvious, it isn't menacing. It just sits there in the far corner like it's been waiting for you all along, warm to the touch even in January, its brass latch never fully closing, as though the lid knows it will be opened again soon. I don't know who brought it here or when, nobody does, but it has always been here in the loft above the feed room. Older than the boards it rests on, older maybe than the barn itself. From the outside it looks harmless enough, chipped paint dulled with age, corners worn smooth from countless hands. But it's what waits inside that makes your stomach twist. You never know what you'll find. A single boot neatly tied with its laces, a railroad watch ticking though there's no key to wind it, a child's photograph with faces smiling from a year no one remembers. Once even a wallet full of bills crisp and new as though they'd just come from the bank. Some of the men thought it was luck, thought the box was a kind of forgotten treasure chest left behind by workers long gone. But then they learned the rule. If you take something, you must put something back, and it must matter to you. Not to anyone else, to you. A trinket you don't care about won't do. It has to carry weight, memory, meaning, or the box will decide what's fair. I learned that early. I opened it one night and found a coin pressed flat like it had been struck by a train, its edges worn smooth by hands that had held it for years. I took it, thought I could keep it in my pocket like a lucky charm, but before I even made it down the ladder, I felt the air tighten in my chest, and the shadows in the rafters seemed to gather like a noose overhead. My gut told me plain, the box was waiting. So I turned back, rummaged through my jacket, and set my father's old Zippo lighter inside, the same one he carried overseas, the one he'd handed me when I turned 18 with a warning, never to waste fire. Leaving it there nearly broke me, but when I dropped it in the bin, the air loosened, the rafters stretched back into ordinary wood,
and I could breathe again. That was the first time I understood the rule. A boy named Jimmy didn't take it seriously. He was cocky like all new hires are, sneering when the old hands told him about the red bin. One morning, he pried the lid open, grinned wide, and held up a $100 bill, crisp, folded like it had just come from the bank vault. He pocketed it, and when we asked what he'd left in return, he tossed a paperclip inside like it was a joke, said the box was nothing but old junk and tall tales. 2 days later, he called in sick, said he had a fever. A week passed and no one saw him again. No calls, no texts, no answers at his door. His locker still smells faintly of peppermint gum, his jacket still hangs on the hook, but Jimmy is gone. After that, no one laughed. The rule hardened into law. Never leave the red bin empty, and if you take, you give back something equal in value. I've left watches, notes folded from old journals, the nickel my father gave me the first time I drove a stick, pieces of myself that hurt to part with, but kept the loft quiet. Sometimes I climb up there not to take anything, but to make sure it isn't sitting empty, because emptiness is dangerous. I've seen what happens when the bin isn't satisfied. The animals won't eat, the tractors stall for no reason, the air itself turns heavy like storm weather, and men start whispering names they don't remember learning. I swear, once I heard the faint sound of crying coming from inside, soft and small like a child weeping into the wood. That's why I never leave it long without checking. The red bin isn't picky, but it is patient. And patience on this farm isn't mercy. It's hunger, biding its time until someone forgets. And I've made sure I never will. The first time I found a straw tag stamped with the number 32 was a morning that started ordinary. Coffee too bitter, dogs restless, dew clinging to the fence rails like glass beads, and ended with me convinced that the land had finally noticed me in a way that it never had before. I was patching the south fence, sweat rolling under my collar when my hand dipped into my pocket for a nail and closed around something rough. I pulled it out, and there it was. A slip of straw, yellowed, twisted tight with a loop of twine, the number 32 pressed into it in black ink so sharp it looked wet. My stomach nodded because I knew the rule. If a straw tag marked 32 turns up in your pocket, burn it before it burns you. The air around me went still. Not quiet, but still. The way it feels when thunderheads choke the sky and the whole world holds its breath. Somewhere, faint and far, I heard it. The low groan of
An engine, not the diesel rattle of a tractor, not the hum of a truck, but something older, deeper, like wood and iron grinding together, like a train running under the soil. My knees wanted to buckle, but I forced myself to the burn barrel by the shop, dumped diesel over dry hay, and struck a match with hands that shook like leaves. The tag curled slow, ink blistering, smoke rising bitter and sweet at once, and I swear in that moment I felt something watching, weighing me, as though I'd barely met the condition of some test I never agreed to take. Later, the old hands told me the harvest man is the one who leaves those tags, a figure they whisper about in the break room but never name too loud because they say the land lends him ears. Tall, shoulders squared, always in a conductor's uniform or sometimes bib overalls, depending on who's telling it, but always with that badge pinned bright on his chest. 32, polished until it gleams. He doesn't knock, doesn't chase, doesn't rage. He just appears on the lane, wagon hitched to shadows that take the shape of whatever frightens you most. A hayrack groaning under invisible weight, a coal tender slicked with soot, sometimes nothing at all but darkness stacked high, moving like it's drawn by hooves you can't see. And he offers you a ride. That's all. No threats, no promises, just a question with a smile that isn't unkind. And that's what makes him dangerous. The ones who see him are never the ones who laugh at rules or mock the stories. It's always the ones already tired down to the marrow, the ones carrying grief like a sock they can't put down. I've heard of widows nodding before they even realized, of old men stepping up onto a wagon that wasn't there, of young hands like Curtis, the boy swallowed by the auger, who swore he was fine right until the day he vanished, and the only thing left behind was a tag curled tight in the mud.
Some say the Harvest Man is Death himself, the Grim Reaper dressed in overalls, but I don't believe it's that simple. Death is final. This feels like choice. The engine sound isn't a summons, it's an invitation. And that's worse, because invitations require consent. And out here, it's too easy to give consent when your back aches, your heart aches, and the weight of the rules feels heavier than your bones. I felt that temptation. Felt it in the way the tag seemed to warm in my hand as I walked it to the burn barrel. Felt it in the way my pulse slowed when I held the match over it, like a part of me wanted to keep it, to see what came next. But I remembered the rule, and I remembered the jar in the shop filled with what we've cut out of the red scarecrow, and I remembered Jimmy's empty locker, and I knew better than to take the gamble. Still, sometimes when the air is thick and the corn whispers my name, I think about what it would be like to see that tall figure waiting at the end of the lane, hot brim low, badge catching the light, wagon creaking under shadows. I tell myself I'd walk the other way. I tell myself I'd burn the tag again. But deep down, I know the Harvest Man doesn't waste time on those who aren't tempted. And the fact that I heard his engine at all means temptation already knows where I live.
Nights on the farm each have their own shape, and if you've lived here as long as I have, you start to recognize them like faces in a crowd. The low, cloudy nights when your flashlight beam feels like it's cutting through water, the brittle, star-bright ones where every shadow has an edge sharp enough to bleed, and the worst kind, when the air is so still it feels like the world's been nailed shut, waiting for something to crack it open. It was one of those nights when I made the mistake of walking the north fence after dark, telling myself I needed to check a loose board, though really I just wanted to prove to myself I wasn't afraid. My boots crunched gravel steady enough until the lantern glow cut through the mist ahead of me, soft gold bobbing slow and steady, and I felt my throat tighten. My mouth knew the words before my head did. "Evening, Tom." And the pressure eased, though my knees still wanted to buckle as the Headless Farmhand drifted past, lantern swaying like a heartbeat. I should have gone back to the bunkhouse then, but something in me kept walking, and the fence line angled me straight toward the lower corn where row 32 waits like a snare in tall grass. I told myself I'd skirt it, but when I rounded the turn, I caught the scarecrow in my sight, painted grin loose at the seams, head tilted just a notch like it was listening. The corn hushed around me, not wind, not animals, just hush. And then came the sound I dread most, the quick, high giggle of a child right by my knees. My gut went cold, and I forced my eyes to the dirt between my boots, whispering the rules like a prayer. Greet Tom, feed the bin, stay out of row 32. The giggle faded, but the scarecrow's canvas ribs bulged, shifting like breath under a blanket. And that's when I heard the engine, faint at first, then swelling until it pressed against my ribs from the inside. Not a tractor, not a truck, something older, something with iron lungs and coal breath, grinding closer from nowhere. I turned toward the lane, and sure enough, the shadows were bending, forming the shape of a wagon hitched to nothing, the tall figure standing at its head. He was clearer than I'd ever imagined, hat brim low, shoulders squared, badge polished and gleaming, 32, like it had just been buffed for inspection. He didn't beckon, didn't threaten, he just looked at me, steady, waiting, and I swear I felt my bones lean toward him like iron drawn to a magnet. My chest went loose, my mind went quiet, and for a moment the temptation was so deep it didn't feel like temptation at all. It felt like relief, like laying down a sack you'd carried too long. I almost stepped off the gravel. I almost let myself fall into that silence. But then the dogs, those old cowards who never leave the porch, started barking wild in the distance, and the lantern glow flared again along the ditch, Tom still walking his line, steady as ever. Between the scarecrow listening, the harvest man waiting, and the headless farmhand searching, I knew the rules were all that stood between me and whatever the land wanted from me. I clenched my fists until the nails bit blood, forced my mouth to work, and muttered one last,
"Evening, Tom," just loud enough for the night to hear. The lantern light shifted, the engine sound thinned like static on a dying radio, and when I finally dared to look up, the scarecrow was standing straight again, seams pulled tight, canvas face blank as stitched paint. The harvestman tipped his hat once, slow and polite, then turned his wagon into shadows that folded back into the corn until only the crickets and the barking dogs remained. My legs carried me back to the bunkhouse without permission, every step feeling like a gift I hadn't earned. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window with the rules scrawled in my head like scripture, knowing full well that I'd just brushed against all three at once, and that mercy doesn't come free out here. It comes on credit, and sooner or later, the farm will call in the debt.
Morning shifts usually keep me grounded. The smell of hay, the hiss of water lines kicking on, the way cattle shuffle with sleepy bellows like a choir warming up. But that morning I knew something was off the second I tugged on my jacket and felt the weight of something that hadn't been there the night before. My heart sank before I even reached into the pocket, because I already knew what I'd find. A straw tag, yellowed and brittle, tied with twine, the number 32 stamped into it so dark it seemed to bleed through my fingertips. My throat went dry. For a second, I just stared at it, caught between awe and dread, because part of me, the tired, bone-weary part, wanted to hold on to it, to see what came next, to step willingly into whatever ride the harvestman had waiting. I could already hear it, faint in the distance, the low rumble of that impossible engine, wood and iron grinding together like an old train climbing a hill, pulling shadows behind it like cargo. The air shifted too, grew heavy, as if every sound on the farm had dimmed to make room for that slow, deliberate approach. My hands shook, but the tag itself felt warm, almost comforting, as though it had been waiting for me specifically, chosen me. I thought of Jimmy's empty locker, of Curtis's vanished glove, of the missing children whose names no one dares speak, and for a heartbeat I still wanted to tuck the tag back into my pocket to let the wagon roll in and lift the weight off my shoulders. That temptation is the cruelest part of it. You don't feel fear, you feel relief, like surrender would be easier than carrying on. But the rules are etched into me deeper than my own scars, and Rule 3 screamed loud in my head. If a straw tag marked 32 ever turns up in your pocket, burn it before it burns you. My legs carried me to the burn barrel behind the shop, that they felt like they belonged to someone else. I splashed diesel, struck a match, and dropped the tag in. The twine shriveled, the straw curled, and the number clung stubbornly until the last black smoke twisting up like a signal to something I couldn't see. That was when the engine sound swelled close, too close, rattling my ribs from the inside. My vision blurred, the world tilted, and for a moment I saw him, tall, hat brim low, badge gleaming, standing at the end of the lane with the wagon at his back, waiting. He didn't beckon, he didn't frown. He just stood, patient, polite, as if to say, the choice is yours. I gripped the edge of the barrel until my knuckles screamed, whispered the rules under my breath like scripture, and refused to look up again until the smoke cleared. Slowly, the rumble thinned, the weight in the air lifted, and when I finally raised my eyes, the lane was empty. No harvestman, no wagon, just a crow perched on the fence, cocking its head as if to mock me. I staggered back inside, heart hammering, clothes stinking of smoke, and dropped onto the bench by the tack room where the rules are written in grease pencil, smudged and fading, but still legible. My voice shook as I recited them out loud. Greet Tom, feed the bin, burn the tag. Over and over until my breathing steadied. The farm had tested me, offered me the out it knows I sometimes crave, and I had passed. For now. But passing doesn't mean winning. It means the land will wait, patient as wrought, until the day my will slips, until the day I decide the ride looks easier than another sunrise. And the worst part? I know that day will come. The tag proved it.
I always told myself I'd never see him clear, that the harvestman would stay nothing more than a story whispered over coffee in the break room, a shadow glimpsed from the corner of the eye, an engine you heard but never found the wheels for. But deep down, I knew the land was patient, and patience out here always means it's saving something for you. And last week, it decided it was my turn. The night had that brittle clarity that makes every star look like a nail punched through black felt. The dogs were silent for once, and the corn stood too still. No hiss of wind, no rustle of creatures. I was heading up the lane, a flashlight in one hand, nails in my pocket, when the ground under me seemed to hum with a rhythm my bones recognized before my brain did. Iron lungs pumping, cold breath grinding, the unmistakable sound of an engine pulling weight from nowhere. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something crueler, relief. The thought that maybe I could stop fighting, stop hauling, stop pretending I'm not tired. And then I saw him, tall, shoulders squared like a man used to being obeyed, standing right at the blacktop where the dirt road ended, a shadow wagon at his back creaking with invisible cargo. The badge pinned to his chest gleaming 32 in the starlight as though it had been polished just for me. His hat brim was low, face lost in shadow, but I swear his eyes met mine all the same, steady, not unkind. He didn't move, didn't call, didn't even beckon. He just stood there like a conductor waiting for me to hand him my ticket. My legs wanted to walk on their own, like something inside me had been leaning toward this moment for years. And for one terrible second, I let myself imagine climbing into that wagon, letting the weight slide off my shoulders, closing my eyes and never waking up to another dawn on this cursed farm. My heart slowed, my breathing steadied, and that's when I realized how easy it would be. Not horror, not pain, but rest. I almost stepped off the gravel. I swear my boot heel lifted. But then the dogs barked back at the house, wild and frantic, tails thumping against the porch like drum beats, and from the corner of my vision I saw Tom's lantern flare bright along the fence line, swaying slow and steady as always. The rules rushed back to me, as though the land itself was shoving them down my throat. Greet Tom, feed the bin, burn the tag, stay out of row 32. My mouth was dry as dust, but I forced the words out anyway, loud enough for the night to hear. "Evening, Tom!" The lantern light bobbed once, the air around me loosened, and the harvest man's shoulders shifted just slightly, like a man who's miscounted his cards but won't admit it. He touched the brim of his hat, polite, and in that gesture I felt both mercy and warning. The engine rumbled once more, shaking the dirt like a heartbeat, then thinned to nothing as the wagon turned into shadows that folded back into the night. My knees nearly gave, and I dropped right there in the lane, hands shaking, sweat cold on my back despite the chill in the air. I don't remember walking back to the house. I only remember sitting on the porch, staring at the rules nailed to the tack room wall, wondering how many more nights like that I could survive before one day I didn't whisper the words fast enough, or one day I decided to let my boots carry me the last few steps into the wagon. People talk about death coming sudden, cruel, violent. But out here, death waits polite and patient, offering you a ride you almost want to take. And I don't know how much longer I can keep saying no.
The farm looks ordinary again this morning. Sun breaking over the silo, cattle shifting in the yard, dew steaming off the pasture, like nothing ever happened. But I know better. And so would you if you'd lived here long enough to feel the land press back when you press against it. I sat on the porch all night, boots still muddy from the lane, eyes fixed on the tack room door where the rules hang, faded grease pencil script smudged by too many hands. And I whispered them until my throat went raw, because if I stopped, even for a second, I was afraid I'd hear the engine again, rolling low beneath the soil, calling me by name. 10 years I've worked here, and every year I tell myself I've gotten used to it, that the accidents and vanishings and whispered stories are just pieces of bad luck stretched thin by frightened imaginations. But that night on the lane stripped the lie clean. I saw him. The harvest man. Badge gleaming 32, wagon creaking under shadows that smelled of iron and coal, patient as death but gentler, almost merciful. And that's what scares me most, how much I wanted to say yes. I've lived by these rules my whole damn life. Greet Tom when his lantern cuts the dark, never leave the red bin empty, stay out of row 32, and burn the tag if it finds you. But rules are only as strong as the will of the man who follows them, and mine's been wearing thin like barbed wire left to rust in the rain. Sometimes I wonder if that's the true curse of this place, not that it kills you quick, but that it waits, polite and patient, until the day you stop wanting to fight. The scarecrow still stands out there, grinning wide, seams too tight over ribs that shouldn't exist, waiting for a child to wander too close. The red bin still sits warm in the loft, latch never quite closed, holding whatever trade the next desperate soul leaves behind. Tom still walks the fence with his lantern, steady, searching for a head he'll never find. A reminder that respect buys you time but never mercy. And me? I'm still here, still breathing, still patching fences and logging feed like an ordinary man. Except I know this farm is no ordinary place. It's a ledger, a balance sheet written in blood and bone and straw tags, and every day I work here is another line written against me. The worst part is, I don't hate it. The routine, the silence, the strange order of it all, it's burrowed into me so deep I can't picture myself anywhere else. Maybe that's how the farm wins. Maybe it doesn't need to drag me into the corn or tempt me with wagons and engines. Maybe it just needs me to stay, year after year, until one night I let my boots carry me a step too far. My mouth forgets to say, "Evening, Tom." My hands fail to offer the bin something worth losing, or my pocket fills with a straw tag I don't bother to burn. That's why I'm telling you this, why I'm speaking out loud into the morning light while the birds chatter like nothing's wrong, because someone should remember the rules even if I don't last. So listen close. If you ever find yourself here, walking these fields, breathing this air, remember them. If you see the lantern on the fence line, greet him, because he still thinks he's one of us. If you open the red bin, don't leave it empty, or it will decide for you what's fair. And if you ever step too close to row 32, if the red scarecrow tilts its head, or a straw tag stamped 32 turns up in your pocket, burn it, walk away, and never look back. Most folks who pass through never notice a thing. They buy sweet corn, take a photo, head home safe, and call this just another patch of country dirt. But I know better. I live here. And until the farm decides otherwise, I'll keep working, keep watching, keep following the rules. But if one day you pass by and see Scarecrow's grin a little wider, or the loft bin holding something that once belonged to me, or the lantern glow burning brighter along the fence line, you'll know my time finally came due. And you'll understand why I told you this, because some places don't just take lives, they collect them, slow and patient, until the land itself is full of stories. And now you know mine. So that's my story, and those are the rules of this farm. Maybe you'll call me superstitious, maybe you'll say I've just been here too long and the quiet got into my head. But I know what I've seen, and I know what happens to those who forget the rules. So if you ever find yourself working land that feels heavier than it should, where the soil seems to breathe and the shadows stand a little too still, remember mine. Because one day you might hear that engine too, and when you do, you'll wish you had listened. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, don't forget to subscribe to Echoes After Midnight for more stories like this one. We share the strange, the dark, and the mysterious, delivered in story format every single week. Until next time, stay safe and remember, some rules aren't made to be broken.